Priestley opens up and Inspector Calls with an embodiment of the social hierarchy of 1912. He wants to create characters that will represent what 1912 society was like and what was wrong with it. So the great thing about Inspector Calls is every single character is a manifestation of that time. It's a representation of something Priestley is criticising. They're really easy, therefore, to talk about because they're all metaphors, really, of something he wanted to criticise. The great thing about this text is whatever question you get, really the character is the metaphor for that idea. Yeah. So he sets up with this Burling family, and the Burling family are a representation of the injustice of the social hierarchy because they're in the bourgeoisie and their life is very comfortable and they are very pleased with themselves. And the first character I'm going to start talking about today is Mrs. Burling. And Mrs. Burling is her husband's social superior, and she was born into wealth. So she's not even just bourgeoisie, she is a member of the ruling class. She was born into wealth. She's really high up this ladder, Mrs. Burling. If we think of it as like a ladder in social class, she is at the top of this ladder. That means she has a high status. She has a high status. And with a high status comes power and control. And ultimately, a very comfortable, quite easy life. And we can describe that as privilege. She has the privilege, because of her status, of a very comfortable and very easy life. She has money, she has power, she has authority. And Mrs. Burling is a representation of how that power is used to maintain that status. Just like we talked about in London, where we talked about the palace walls and how those walls were kind of built as barriers to maintain the status of the monarchy, to maintain their power. They decided to not, to create the distance between the inferiority of the people and the superiority of the monarchy. It's kind of the same with Mrs. Burling. She wants to maintain that high status of power and control. And we see that really clearly through her language. She is often telling her family what they ought and what they are supposed to do. So the words ought and supposed are commands. Mrs. Burling commands her family. And we learned a great word in Inspector Calls. We learned the word police. To police something means to control it, doesn't it? So she commands and polices her family. But she doesn't command them and police them to say thank you and please, to be responsible, to apologise. We don't see that in this play. We see her commanding them of what they ought and supposed to do to preserve their high status. So it's all about appearances. It is all about representations of class and status, which shows us really that Mrs. Burling is quite a cold, that's a quotation, and hubristic character. She sees herself as superior and wants to maintain that superiority. In particular, she wants to stop her family from being improper or transgressing the rules of the bourgeoisie. So she maintains the rules or the expectations of the bourgeoisie. In order to maintain the bourgeoisie, you have to maintain this class divide, don't you? To keep us at the top, to keep the bourgeoisie at the top, you have to keep the triangle or the status quo stable. So she, by proxy, maintains the class divide. And think about what that symbolises, what Priestley's trying to teach us then about the bourgeoisie. What do they care about mostly over everything else? Okay? He's aiming to show that she feels she must command and control her husband and her family to stabilize her status and avoid the collapse of her reputation. So Priestley aims to show how fears about the fragility of the status quo can lead the bourgeoisie to be controlling and commanding. Because she fears any loss of power, to avoid the loss of power, reputation, and status, she becomes controlling. She becomes commanding. Now, this is a running theme throughout an Inspector Calls. When the bourgeoisie feel threatened, when they feel their status quo is at threat, to avoid this loss, they will be controlling and commanding. And we will see that time and time again.